Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome into another episode of the GC Show. I hope you all are doing absolutely amazing here on this Monday afternoon. And today we have a little bit of a different structure of an episode. You see, every person and everything has a backstory. So today we are going to be discussing the backstory of the GC Show and why I decided to do the GC Show and, what's the motivation behind it. You may be asking, what is the goal of the GC show? What is the purpose of the GC show? What's the drive? What's that thing that gets you going as to why you started the GC show? So today, all those questions hopefully get answered. I'll do my best. So you may also be asking, what does the GC stand for? And I'll get that out of the way real quick. I think the GC, in the sense of the GC show, gets mistaken for my name, but that's not it. You see, if the GC in the sense of the GC show stood for my name, then it would be like the name would be talking about the me show. And that's not what it's about. The GC stands for God centered, because this is the God centered show. And with every lesson that I give, every video that I record, my goal will be to keep it God centered. So that is what the GC, in the sense of the GC show, stands for. I have another thing I'm going to discuss too today. Is the B.A.T.H acronym. You may have never heard of it, but we're going to discuss it anyway. I'll answer that a little bit later. And you may be asking, what's the significance of June 25th? You've talked about it a couple of times on the show. What's the significance of it? And we are going to dive into that right now. June 25th of 2024. To set the stage, that was the day that very well could have been my last. And if a few things would have gone differently, it would have been my last day here on Earth. So we had some friends in town. We're going out to a pizza restaurant down in St. Augustine, Florida, which if y'all have never been, it's a beautiful place, St. Augustine, Florida. And, we order our pizza, order the food, and, we eat. And then after that, my sister and her friend go off and shop. And then me and my buddy, we kind of walk around St. Augustine a little bit, tour the area, just kind of see like what's around. And my stomach is hurting a little bit. And, we get to the point eventually where I ask him, I was like, can we go back and go to the bathroom? Like my stomach's hurting. It's not feeling good. Like something is off here. I got to use the bathroom real quick. So, we actually go back to the pizza restaurant because I remember there was a bathroom in there. And when I walked into the bathroom, I looked into the mirror and my eyes were a little bit red, so I was thinking, oh, it's June. There's probably pollen on the ground. It's just pollen allergy. No big deal. And then, I go to sit down and nothing comes out. So that's when I was like, okay, this is kind of whack here because my stomach was hurting really bad, but then there's nothing. So like, what's up with that? And, as I get up and I'm getting ready to leave the bathroom, I look into the mirror again, but this time I look significantly different. You see, when I looked into that mirror, what I saw looking back at me was bloodshot red eyes and a face that was pale as white as a ghost. And it was scary to see that. And that's a state that I hope I never have to see myself in ever again. And I hope I never have to see anybody else looking like that, because I knew in that instant that something was terribly wrong. So immediately, I knew at that moment, I was like, I think I might be having an allergic reaction. And that's when like it hit me subconsciously that like I'm in anaphylactic shock right now. So I text my sister, I tell her I'm having an allergic reaction. And then what do I do? The smartest play possible. I go out back into like the alley behind the pizza restaurant, which it's not the smartest decision in the world. But, at that point, my mind was going all sorts of places. I don't know what to do. I was thinking, oh, we'll walk back, meet up at the car, and then figure it out from there. So I start to walk back behind the restaurant. She calls me, my sister calls me, and from the time she called me to when she found me was under a minute, which that in itself is a miracle because I don't know if y'all ever been to St. Augustine, Florida before, but not even exaggerating, the strip of stores, like the main strip of stores, is probably like half a mile long. I don't even think I'm exaggerating that, but I could be. But it's long. So for her to find me in under a minute was pretty impressive, and that in itself was a miracle. And whenever she saw me, she knew immediately call an ambulance. She knew that something was wrong. So she called the ambulance, kind of stood off to the side, and waited for the ambulance to get there, which was probably like 5 to 7 minutes, and it felt like 30 minutes because, essentially I was slowly dying. And, the ambulance eventually gets there, and the medic, they're asking me questions and stuff, like running oxygen tests and all that. They're like, okay, we got to get you into the ambulance and get you to the hospital. So they lay me down on like a bed thing. I don't know what they necessarily call that. Get me up in the ambulance, and like immediately all these needles are just like stuck into me, and yeah, it was not fun. But at that point, it's like it's a life or death situation, so you don't even care. Like I think there were probably 4 needles in me at once, and it was the one they stuck into my left shoulder. Man, I remember looking at it before they stuck it into my arm, and I was like, "Holy cow, there's no way!" And I just you just kind of had to do it. So eventually, they transport me to the hospital, and then like from the process of them transporting me to the hospital, and then from then on until I left the hospital, I really don't remember a whole lot because whenever I got the EpiPen shot, it's like you kind of just like gone in a sense. So I don't really remember a whole lot of that, but they got me well. Went home that night, went to bed that night, woke up the next day, and then life was back to normal. It was another day. And you see, you don't understand the significance of a moment in your life until later. I kind of thought it was just no big deal, but little did I know this would be one of the biggest and most impactful moments in my entire life. And you see, what I learned from this event later that was blows my mind is that my sister's phone was on Do Not Disturb, meaning that if she was not on her phone in the exact instant that I texted her, things could have gone a lot differently and a lot worse. So, whenever I heard that and just like thinking about that, I'm like, it blows my mind, man. Like, that in itself is straight up a miracle from God. I fully believe that. That is a miracle from God. And you see more with that. What I learned from this day is that any day on this earth could be my last. You never plan at 16 years old that some random Tuesday in June is going to be your last day on earth. You just don't plan for that. So what I learned is that any day could be my last. And knowing that God has me here for another day helps me to remember that God woke me up today for a reason. And I have that hanging above my door, so I see that every single day to know that God woke me up today for a reason. And I want you to know that God woke you up today for a reason too. You see, if you are still on this earth, which you are if you're watching this video right now or listening, there's a reason why God has you here. And there is a purpose as to why God has you here. If he didn't have a purpose for you, he wouldn't have you here. And, on that day, what I learned is that, if God didn't want me here anymore, he would have let me die that day. But the fact that he let me live helps me to know that God put me here for a reason. And, knowing that any day could be my last, I know that I need to make the most of every day. And that's kind of where I got the Be Great Today slogan from. But we're going to dive more into that in next week's episode. So I hope you would tune in to that. Wink, wink. It may or may not be called Be Great Today, the episode next week, the final episode in season 1. So as we get to the verses for today, it comes out of the book of Numbers, which, if you ask many people, probably it wouldn't be like the most appealing book in the Bible. It talks a lot about laws and sacrifices and offerings. It's not the most like appealing book in the Bible, but there is still a lot of good in here. And if it's in the Bible, it is most definitely good. So you see our verses, Numbers chapter 6, verses 24 to 26. I'll read them to you. It says, "May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace." So the middle verse of those three, may the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. So, I know all the sins that I have committed in my life. And I know that with the things that I have done, you know, I should not be here on this earth because of my sin. But by God's grace, he gives me another chance. He gives me what I do not deserve. And more specifically, going back to, June 25th, um, throughout the entire time, my mindset was, God's got this. It's not a big deal. Like, it'll all be good. God's got this. And this is kind of alluding back to the episode talking about where, like, the choice is up to you. God has put the situation in front of you. God has put the situation in front of you. It is up to you as to what you do with the situation. In that time of emergency, I was just thinking, God's got this. We're fine. No big deal. God's got this. But I wasn't doing anything to help myself out. If it would have just been me alone there, I probably would not have made it. So, knowing that my mindset throughout that entire time was the wrong mindset to have, in that with that mindset, I should not have made it out alive, knows that it helps me to know that God's grace is the only reason as to why I'm here today. It is by God's grace as to why I'm here. So when it says, may the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you, I know that God has shown me so much more grace than I deserve. And you see this middle verse here. I'll tell you this, these three verses are my favorite verses. And the middle one specifically is my favorite. And the reason is because, the middle verse here is Numbers chapter 6, verse 25. And the day in which God's grace overflowed and allowed me to still be here on this earth was June 25th, 6:25. On that day, the Lord made his face shine upon me and was gracious to me. And that's why that's my favorite verse. I don't deserve to be here, but by God's grace, I'm here. And whenever I found out that, like, that was number 625, and 625 was the day that I shouldn't have made it out alive, that was crazy, bro. Whenever I first figured that out, I just kind of stared at my Bible for like 5 minutes. It was just speechless, thoughtless. I didn't know, like, what to do. I was like, bro, that's all God, man. Like, God aligns things so perfectly, and he moves in ways that you would never imagine. He's unreal, man. So that is June 25th. That is the drive behind the GC show. Really, that's kind of the drive behind why I do a lot of things that I do, is that, God gave me another chance, so I'm not going to waste that chance. I'm going to do the most with what God has given me, understanding that God has me here for a reason, for a purpose. I want to fulfill that purpose that God has in my life. So when it comes to the GC show, what is the goal? What is the purpose of the GC show? So whenever I started out on this show, whenever you're on social media and you're posting stuff, it's so easy to, get caught up in the views you're getting, the likes you're getting, the follows, the subscribes that you're getting. And I was kind of focused on that a little bit. So for me, I decided to make an acronym that I could remember and know that, I'm not doing this for the likes, for the subscribes, for the views, but I'm doing this for the glory of God. So, with an acronym, it's something that you think about a lot, and, like, it's easy to remember and you know what it means. And this is an acronym that I tell myself before I sit down and record every single episode. And the acronym I came up with was B.A.T.H. Bring them all to heaven. Bring them, I don't even think that's a word. I took bring them and just combined them into one word. bring them. Bring them all to heaven. That is the goal of the GC show. The goal is not to, get a bunch of likes, a bunch of views, a bunch of subscribers, followers, whatever it may be. But the goal of the GC show is and will always be to point even just one more person toward Christ. And with every lesson that I give, my goal is to point you toward Christ. And in that sense, my goal is to bring them all to heaven. So whenever I sit down and before I record, I tell myself, Gavin, go out there and bring them all to heaven. Point them toward Christ. That is and will always be the goal of the GC show. So why did I do a Christian podcast specifically? I believe that is what God called me to do. You see, for so long, I would sit down and pray and ask God, I'm ready. What is it that you want me to do in this world for the kingdom? And, that idea would just flash in my mind, Christian podcast. And then I'd get done praying and I'd be like, bro, I don't even like public speaking. I'm scared of that. I don't know how to do that. I'm just not going to do it. Like, there's no way that's ever going to happen. And then I'd pray it again, Christian podcast. And it's maybe like, and then I get to the point where it's like, Christian podcast, this keeps coming up. Like, maybe what if I just what if this is what I'm supposed to be doing, but I don't know how to do it, so I'm just not going to do it. And eventually it came to the point where I sat down. And for so long, that idea of Christian podcasts had been just flowing through my mind that I came to the point where I said, who cares whether or not I'm comfortable doing a Christian podcast and quote unquote public speaking? If this is what God wants me to do and this is what God has for me, then I need to be doing it. If God is telling me to do something, I need to be doing it. So, I realized, and I put my, fears aside and me being uncomfortable, I put that aside. And I decided to just say, if this is God's plan for me, then this is what I need to be doing. So I decided to start that thing and start the GC show. And look where we're at now. Almost at the end of season 1. It's unreal, man. And another thing I thought about with that too is, doing a Christian podcast, I really could have done recorded videos on anything. I'm big in sports. I could have done a sports talk show. But the reason why I decided to do a Christian podcast is because that I know people around me who, maybe haven't been to church before or haven't been around church growing up and may think that church is intimidating. So if they can hear a God-centered lesson from a peer, from someone that they know, they can still be introduced to the gospel and hear a God-centered lesson without, being intimidated or scared by church. But, the other side with that too is that, if the GC show is the only time you're getting, the gospel and God-centered lessons in the week, I would encourage you to get into church because church is such an important part, of your life, to be in church on Sunday mornings and, hear preachers preach the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. But I just figure, if I can reach people who maybe are new to Christianity, people who don't know much about Christ, and, hopefully make these lessons easily understandable for people to be able to learn more about God and what Christianity is and what being a follower of Christ is about, that's what I want to do. And I know that people can get more out of that than a sports talk show, because Christianity and your belief in God and your faith in God is something that you take with you for your entire life and your eternity. But a sports talk show would just be something that stays here on earth. You don't take that with you, and that's not something that's life impacting, but the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ is something that is life impacting. So, God has already done so much more with the GC show than I could have ever imagined. And, for me, thinking about the GC show, whether it stays right where it's at forever and we get, 30 views-ish per video and stay at around 250 subscribers for the rest of my days, so be it. God is still good. And if God takes this show to great heights and reaches however many people, God is good. Because God's goodness is not based on the success of the GC show. God's goodness is based on the fact that He's so good. He provides us with so many blessings. And even when we think that the things are going wrong because God does things a certain way, it's actually going so much better than we could have ever imagined. So God is so good. And no matter where the GC show goes, God is still good. So, maybe you're able to get something out of the other parts in this episode, but I wanted to give you some advice specifically and kind of narrow it down to 3 simple things when it comes to this episode, some advice for you. The first thing is that God is a miracle worker. He is. He showed up in my life. And me being here today, I know for me, is a miracle. So I want you to know that God is a miracle worker. And He works miracles in your life too, even though you may not see them. And if you do see them, you would know that God is most definitely a miracle worker. The second thing is that God works in ways that you would have never imagined. If you would have told me, even just a year ago, that I would be, well, no, not a year ago, because I was thinking about Christian podcasts, 3 years ago. If you'd have told me 3 years ago that I would be running a Christian podcast and getting to the end of season 1, I would have thought that you were crazy, because I've never been someone that is, big into public speaking. That's been something that has always scared me. And, posting videos online, that's not something that's in my comfort zone. So if you'd have told me that, I would have thought you were crazy. God works in ways that you would have never imagined. And the third thing is that you never know what hangs on the balance if you take even just one step of faith. And, you may say, I don't have what it takes. I don't have the money that it takes to do what God's called me to do. I don't have the talent to do what God's called me to do. I just don't have what it takes to do what God has called me to do. And here's what I want to tell you is that God doesn't call the equipped, but instead He equips the called. So you see, even if you don't think you have what it takes to do what God is calling you to do, He will most definitely provide you with everything that you need for your calling. So that's something that I want you to always remember. And get out there, and if you're thinking about starting that thing, start that thing. Do it. That's what season 1's all about, starting that thing. And that is the lesson for today here on this Why the GC Show episode. As always, any questions, about the GC Show or really just anything, feel free to let me know. And any other comments or suggestions, let me know. And be sure to tune in to next week's episode, because it'll be the final episode in season 1. And like I said earlier, Be Great Today will be the title of next week's episode. And we are going to be discussing where I get that slogan from, why Be Great Today, and just kind of some last notes to end off season 1, which has been amazing. And I'll tell you this, without the support of you guys, I would not be able to keep doing this. Whenever I started, I thought of probably like 5 people that would tune into the GC show. And every week it has been significantly more than that. And I have gotten support from people that I would have never thought I would get support from when it comes to like a Christian podcast. And it's just been unreal what God has done with the GC show. And, the compliments that I have received about the GC show that people have told me to my face, or, people saying things about the GC show that eventually gets back to me. Like, the compliments, every single one of them makes my day, and they mean so much to me. And I hope you guys know that I appreciate each and every one of you that tunes in and supports the GC show week in and week out. It means the world to me, and I would not be able to do this without you guys. So I thank each and every one of you so much. So, next week, the last episode in season 1. Crazy. So, as always, you guys are so awesome, man. Thank you guys for listening. I'll see you guys next week. Be great today, and praise God.